The tabletop takeaway.
Game mechanics on display.
Three designers share the stage.
Pick a genre and we'll play.
The tabletop takeaway.
And welcome back to the Tabletop Takeaway. I'm Trevor Muller-Hagel.
I'm Ananda Gunaratne.
And I'm Charlie McCarran.
And this is our bonus episode on asymmetric games.
Yes. It was a fun series.
It was a fun series. It was a lot of fun. Right off the bat, though, I do want to talk about a new thing we'll be doing. We started it last month as of you hearing this now. But we are starting little design challenges in our Discord. So if you would like to join our Discord, this next one will be about asymmetric games. So if you want to kind of have a little prompt about how to design an asymmetric game, go ahead and join our Discord and see what we've got in there. Other than that, we're going to start talking about what we have learned so far from asymmetric games. Not to be confused with asynchronous games.
Right.
Which I do believe I said in the last episode, so I apologize for that, everyone. No one caught it, though.
I think we're okay, yeah.
You can play them asynchronously.
Asynchronously, true.
Yeah.
As we did with the Great Zimbabwe, technically. Well, actually,
we didn't play asynchronously.
But you could.
But you could easily do so.
Yeah.
So we started with Root from Leader Games, known for their asymmetric games.
Yep.
Then Android Netrunner, 2-player card game by Richard Garfield that's asymmetric.
Yep.
And then the Great Zimbabwe, which doesn't probably pose itself as an asymmetric game at first, but you
grow into it as you play.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's so many, like the more I was thinking about it, there's so many asymmetric games that are 2-player or 1v many, which maybe we'll have to do another series about 1v many games.
We should absolutely do a whole series on 1v many, but does not necessarily fit in this category.
Right.
Well, I mean, one thing I think about designing asymmetric games is that it is in many ways a lot easier to design an asymmetric game that has two sides against each other rather than one like Root, which has multiple different sides. Because if you care about balancing the game, it is a huge number of interactions. Whereas if you have just like two sides, right, whether it's 1v1 or 1v many, you can sort of balance it, right? Because it's just those. It's all the interactions are between those two.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like the more recent Star Wars deck building game from Fantasy Flight, where you play the dark side and the light side of the Rebels and the Empire or the Alliance, however you want to, whatever group you're in at that time, because like the Rebels only acquire the blue cards and the Empire only acquires the red cards, and you can defeat the other cards in the middle. It is a deck builder, but when you defeat it, that interacts differently than if you capture a card. And so, like, you're still operating in the same play space, but yet again, you have that one-on-one, like, if they get Darth Vader, I'm going to be in trouble, so I want to make sure I take out Darth Vader first so that they don't get access to him. And it creates a much more, I don't want to say asymmetrical game, but you do have a little bit more of that going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think... and I think if you look at the games that are out there, they are mostly going to be like that, where you have two sides. Whereas Leader Games, I think most of their games are asymmetric and have multiple different sides.
Oh yeah.
So that's kind of their thing. But if you look elsewhere, there aren't that many examples. I guess Dune and Cosmic Encounter and those are the two big games from those guys, but those are both quite asymmetric. And I guess if you look at Cosmic Encounter, it's sort of going the other direction, right? Where it says, okay, if we don't care about balance, then it's actually quite easy to make, well, not easy, but it's quite straightforward to make an asymmetric game because you just need to make sure that players have ways to ally with each other against greater threats, and it'll balance itself.
Right.
For the most part.
Yeah, finding those points of commonality, which is something we've touched on in each episode, is, I think, a really important thing for these asymmetric games because, how asymmetric is it? In Cosmic Encounter, everyone goes through the same phases of their turn, right? No one deviates from that. Everyone reacts the same, except they have different things that might kick off for different abilities that react different ways.
Right.
But by and large, you follow the same order versus Root, where you have a different order of operations, but you still have the same beginning, middle, and end of your turn.
Right. And in Cosmic Encounter, the alien you have is going to influence how asymmetric it feels.
True.
Because some of them don't feel that different from each other.
Right.
But some of them can just affect the how
whole
you play
gameplay.
wildly.
Yeah.
You know, there's another one we played actually that I just thinking of. Visitor in Blackwood Grove.
Oh,
was
yeah,
multiple
yeah.
sides.
Yeah,
There's the alien. There's the
Kid
and the FBI agent.
Right.
The agencies. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the alien and the kid are sort of working together, but they're also different roles.
Yeah.
And then whereas the FBI agents are like all on their own.
Yeah, each one is all on its own, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting. Yeah, that's a good callback. Thank you, Charlie.
Sure. You know, listen to those episodes if you want to hear what we're talking about. Yeah. But I was also thinking about games where the asymmetric role kind of goes around the table. So like Sheriff of Nottingham is one of my favorites, where each player is a sheriff at one point during the game, and you are like kind of bluffing against that player. And they have this role that's very different. You are kind of having to, I guess if the other players are telling the truth or not. And they wanted everyone to get that experience. So they just have this asymmetric role that kind of goes around the table.
That's a really good point, because if everybody gets to do all of the different roles in the game, then you don't need to worry about whether it's balanced,
yeah.
because everyone's doing all the
Well, and it
same
also
thing.
depends on if certain roles are better at certain times in the game, too. So it can actually open up for, like, if you have a bidding mechanism and you want to, like, hey, I really want to be this time, maybe you could put more into that, because, like, that would be really valuable to you now. But maybe it's not valuable to someone else, and so you don't have to worry about bidding too high. And that could really create an interesting decision space for folks. Mm-hmm. Bidding is a very interesting thing for asynchronous games.
Yeah.
I never even thought about having that.
Yeah.
Asynchronous, I said it again.
Asymmetric.
I cannot get this out of my head.
Well, you sparked me thinking about Sheriff of Nottingham and the other one, Castles of Mad King Ludwig, because when we were talking about setting prices for things, that one, you're setting prices for the tiles for people to bid on, and that's another one that moves around the table, and it's kind of like a reset thing. It's like when you're out of money, then it'll come around to your turn being the price setter, and then people pay you. So it's kind of like this self-balancing system.
Yeah.
But I like that in asymmetric games when it's like one person is the money collector and people are
That's super fun in Dune.
There's a role that...
Well, there's two. So in Dune, there's the Emperor, who collects all money that's bid on treachery cards. Treachery cards are like cards that you can play for special effects. And then there's also the Spacing Guild, who collects all of the money that people pay to ship their troops to Arrakis.
Yeah.
So both of those factions have a strong interest in encouraging conflict so that people will need to restock their hand or ship more troops onto the planet.
Yeah.
And it's fun. It is really fun to be in a position where other people are giving you money to do stuff.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, like, honestly, going back to Root, when I was doing the Vagabond, I wanted to get items and I wanted to forge alliances. So I was just handing out cards like it was nothing. And Ananda, unfortunately, got a lot of my cards. And he did not like that at all, which was really funny.
I mean, I like the cards.
Cards.
I did not like the way you were eyeing my warriors.
Which I had no idea what I was doing as the Vagabond. But, like, I did start messing with him a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Just thinking design standpoint wise, be curious to hear your thoughts about advice on making an asymmetric game. And the thing that popped into my mind was, like, if you are gonna try to make it asymmetric, think about all the different ways that these roles could break the standard rules of a game. And like, for example, when I was testing a game, this Glasses one that I'm talking about, one of my testers was like, do the computer players need to have a turn? And I was like, oh,
Wait, what?
maybe they don't. And I still give them turns, I think, probably. But it just made me think, like, well, if the humans are doing these things that are very human-like, walking around,
Having turns.
maybe the computer players are doing something very different.
Yeah.
So, like, leaning into that, I think, would be my advice.
Asymmetricality.
Yeah. Not just like, oh, I have a special power, but if you can make something that feels like I'm breaking the game.
Like you mean like structurally, the way they interact with the game is not the same.
Yeah.
So we've covered a game that would actually help people do that with their own designs. And Ananda loves this game. In This World would be a very fun way to explore your current game design as the rules, and then how do you break it and what do you use to change it?
Yeah. I was just thinking that too.
Yeah,
actually.
it's like you're saying that like, oh, and you just twist a couple of the things.
Yeah.
So you create your commonalities first, and then how do you break
And
them?
then for each faction you play in this world, the board game design version, to break parts of the rules and reinforce others.
Yeah. So for people who are a little lost right now, we play this game called In This World that's in our series, storytelling, and it's more of an exercise in brainstorming almost.
Yeah.
Where you're...
But like a fun one.
Yeah,
fun
very
one.
fun one.
Yeah.
And the basic concept is you write out... You pick a topic. So for whatever, you could pick your game as the topic and then state like 10 to 12 things about it that are just...
Especially rules that you already have that you really like.
Yeah, could be just
these
like...
are the rules of the game.
Yeah, and even like if you wanted to break some standard mechanics, like everyone takes a turn.
Right.
People gaining money is a good thing. And then...
They have warrior units.
Yeah, warriors are part of the game. And then what you do is you now flip one of those on its head and then think about, oh, what if we just...
It's actually not this.
I mean, the other thing you do is you reinforce some of them.
Right.
So like some of them you invert, and then some of them you reinforce and tie those back to the inversions.
Right.
Sort of contextualizing them. Like, okay, so money is still good, but I don't take turns. So, like, why is money good?
I invest in other factions and I bet on them.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I have played In This World a bunch of times since we did the episode.
Yeah.
It is fantastic, and it is also so useful. I used it to come up with the 5 different factions for my game Sprocket Forge.
Oh, yeah.
And the way that I did that was I took and so this is also asymmetry, right? I've got asymmetric factions in Sprocket Forge, and I took fantasy stereotypes about like, kobolds, dwarves, gnomes, and so forth. And then I just played In This World and used that to come up with a little twist on the stereotype that still feels like them because you're reinforcing some of the stereotypes, but then you invert other ones.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's an amazing tool.
Yeah. Yeah, so being able to take a core design, like, I really want to make this asymmetrical. How do I do that? I don't even know where to start with that. Just play this game with that in mind and like, okay, well, this is how the game works. What are my different factions? Okay, if this were to do that, what would that look like?
Yeah. And maybe the reinforcements are what become the commonalities in your game. Like we've been talking about, like, oh, but everyone actually still has victory points.
Everyone has crafting. But maybe the cats are really good at crafting. And so that's a reinforcement of a core rule. But like, no, they're just really good at it because they spread out really far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone needs cards, but the
lizard people are great with cards.
Yeah,
I still don't understand this, but that's fine.
So why the lizards are good with cards?
Yeah, well, I mean, and I don't need to understand necessarily. I would love to play it at some point, but...
From root.
I love playing the lizard cult, and they are a faction that has been historically considered to be quite weak.
Oh.
And in fact, they were buffed at one point because it was so bad. But I love the lizards. I've played the lizards a bunch, and in my opinion, the number one thing to do as the lizards is get cards, because cards are actions. You want more actions.
Oh,
you
yeah.
get to reuse your cards, and you can also craft. Crafting is difficult as the lizards, but being able to get a few extra points that way, if you're the lizards, go for cards. Get them however you can.
So this speaks to why asymmetric games are really appealing to gamers,
Right.
and specifically game designers probably too. But it feels like when you're playing an asymmetric role, you're really trying to figure out the puzzle of the
Of
game.
that role.
And not only that game, but like how are we supposed to self-balance the game? Like I need to make sure that I'm keeping the cats at bay as the birds. So yeah, that's probably why they're so appealing to people who love game.
Oh, yeah.
Hobbyist gamers.
And, very similar to Cosmic Encounter, where Ananda was saying that, if you have all of these very different factions or very different species doing all this crazy stuff, as long as you have a balancing mechanism of them being able to form alliances and, maybe gang up on someone until that one comes down to their level, and then all of a sudden it's a free-for-all again, and maybe they'll backstab each other even though they were allied just now.
Yeah.
Like, you have this dynamic environment instead of it just being like, if I had done better with the Vagabond and had gotten a lot of stuff, maybe you guys would have fought me more.
Yeah.
And like, no, you can't keep doing this. This is terrible. No, you're going to lose all your equipment. I'm like, oh, man.
Yeah, I was constantly on the verge of attacking you, except that
I wasn't a threat enough.
Yeah, there was never a point where you leaned in to getting tons of points.
Yeah, until the very end.
Yeah.
And that was too late in the game.
Yeah. I guess another way, aside from ganging up on the leader, another thing you can do is, like Root does very well, give people ways to cooperate with whoever is in last place by like, oh, we both get a card, or we both get a point, or whatever.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is some crossover from our last series on semi-cooperative games here too. Like,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking now, like, of asymmetric games tend to work well when it's like a King of the Hill type scenario where it's clear this person's in first place, so maybe we need to both team up against that person.
Which I suppose is why having common game elements to interact with is good, because it makes
Yeah.
it... Like we were talking about with Vast, for example, it's harder to evaluate who's winning in Vast.
Right.
Whereas in Root, you
Yeah.
can just look at the score track.
And one thing I'm having a tricky time with developing this Glasses space survival game is, like, I want there to be different win conditions for the humans and the computers, but they could also win together if they're doing real well. But I also realized that I need to give each side enough tools to counteract the other side. And I think that's probably a pitfall of designing an asymmetric game, is like each person is doing such different things that maybe you don't actually have a
Interact.
chance to combat the other players.
Sure.
But maybe that's okay. Like if it's more of a solitaire style game where it's like just, yeah. I guess can you think of any games that are more, you're doing your own thing? It's very asymmetric, but we're not interacting
with
that
no
much.
interaction. So multiplayer solitaire, but asymmetric.
I know
Effectively.
there's one on the tip of my tongue, but I'm not
Normally,
Well-
I feel like there's been a lot of high interaction games that are asymmetric. So I'm having a hard time thinking of
I kind of feel like they need to be interactive.
to
Because
really feel that
Well,
asymmetry.
like suppose you have a game that's multiplayer solitaire. Well, actually, let's think about multiplayer solitaire for
Sure.
a moment, right? So, what's the appeal of multiplayer solitaire? You're all interacting with the same challenge, and you're trying
Yep.
to see who gets the farthest with it, right?
And there may be resources or something in the middle you're competing for, or like I got this resource and you did not.
But like a lot of multiplayer solitaire games people think of as multiplayer solitaire are like,
Yeah.
for example, roll and writes, right? You roll the dice, everyone figures out the best way to use those dice, and then at the end of the game you say, okay, everyone got the same inputs, who did the best with them.
yeah.
But if you have an asymmetric game, you don't have the same inputs. You're all different.
Right.
Yeah.
So like if you say, okay, well I played my game and you played your game and my game says I won. Is that
We simultaneously played
yeah.
two
Two different games. Like,
different games.
is it because my game was easier for me, or am I better at my game than you are at your game? You know, we're kind of trusting that the games are equivalent.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like you have to have heavy player interaction for an asymmetric game to make sense.
I think
And-
leaning into semi-co-op is interesting too.
Yeah. Well, and what I was going to say is actually, like, I think that method works in a cooperative game. But because, like,
Sure,
Captain
sure.
Sonar, another one we've done on the podcast,
Yeah.
each team is symmetrical
Right,
in
but
that you
each
have the same
role is
roles,
not.
but within the team, you're all doing very different things.
Yeah.
And that is fun because, I can
you're
help.
part of a team, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm doing my own thing, but
Well, but you do interact with each other, at least with the captain, because the captain needs the resources in order to perform the actions that you are in charge of.
Yeah.
And so, like, while you don't interact with your other crewmates, you interact with the captain. And that is the key interaction.
You also care about how your teammates are doing.
That's true.
I mean, I feel like there are some other interactions, weak interactions maybe, but
Even just like, oh, make sure you do the
yeah,
one thing on the ability so we can make sure we can move forward.
yeah. No, I think you need interaction.
Yeah.
so what would you guys do for making an asymmetric game?
I now that I've said in this world with it, I really want to try that method.
I also want to try that method.
Maybe we need to do that, right? after
And
this.
maybe that will be part of the design challenge as well. That could be a fun little way. There's an option. I'm gonna put a few options up, and just so you can kind of play around with like, well, what direction do I want to take this?
Yeah.
But yeah, just to play around with it and see how it goes.
I think asymmetry is compatible with a lot of different genres.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd say all genres, but a lot of them. So I don't know. I guess it's less about making an asymmetric game for me and more about figuring out how I can make my games more asymmetric.
And I think I would actually, removing the comment I just made about in this world, thinking about it from the perspectives of a situation I want to explore with a game, and thinking about the different forces that I would want to have as roles. So if you think Vast, what are the different characters, the different players in Vast? What are the different roles in Root? What are the different, and just really take something and then just, even, Android Netrunner, we have the runner, we have the corp. That's a, very, very simple choice between those two. But then what if there's more options? What if there's 4 different components that all interact in a different way, but they still interact with each other? And I do think, like, the more that I think about it, interaction is really key, because you need to figure out how those moving pieces that are really weird and funky, how do they fit together to make the full shape of the game?
The way that you interact with other players sort of contextualizes your
role.
Your role.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just what do I do, but like, how does what I do, what do the things that I do mean for the other players?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm taking that as my takeaway, which
Nice.
is that asymmetry requires interaction. If you're making a heavily asymmetric game, it should be highly interactive. You cannot, you can't really do asymmetric solitaire. I don't think that makes sense. That's my takeaway.
Yeah. I like that.
Just jumping in there. Nab that.
For my takeaway, I think I'm going to dive into kind of what I was touching on in the first couple episodes for this, and really just embrace the roles that you've created and really create engagement with how you go about those roles and make it feel very... I like thinking about theme and having things be thematically, interesting for what your choices are for the asymmetry. But as long as you keep that core commonality, what are they competing over? What is the core of the game that, all sides are interacting with? But yeah, just really focusing on the roles and taking the perspective of the role.
Yeah.
And making it feel that way.
I think that's a super good point, because another advantage of leaning into the theme is that the rules will be more intuitive.
Right.
And that's the biggest hurdle, I think, is the teach of
Oh, yeah.
4-player leader games game like Root or
Vast.
Yeah. And if I know that, oh, you're the cave. Oh, you're creating
Tunnels
versus like some abstract mechanical.
Mm-hmm. You get plus 3 gold every round. I'm a cave.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What's my takeaway? I don't know. Like
Asymmetry is cool.
it's pretty cool. I feel like I already said my takeaway. Just thinking about like this glasses and space game with the computer players and the humans, and just leaning into that their roles feel real different, and
like even
keeping,
structurally.
Yeah, I think holding to certain rules when you're making your game, setting rules for yourself as a designer. For example, I would imagine that Richard Garfield had this rule in his head when he was making Netrunner, that what we talked about, where the corp is not going to ever really straight up attack the runner.
Yeah.
They're going to only do it based on what the runner does to them. They might have reactions to it, but they are going to just do their own thing for the most part. Whereas the runner, their assets are kind of small. The corp doesn't care about what they have. They're just running at.
They don't have victory points. That's not how they win.
Yeah.
So since the runner does not create victory points, then they don't really have a natural incentive to go after the runner.
Yeah.
I mean, there's...
They can kill him.
Yeah.
But...
like, you care a little bit about what they have just in terms of what ice you put down.
For sure, yeah.
But I definitely, as the corporation, I was not paying that much attention to what you were doing.
Which thematically makes perfect sense. You're this giant megacorp. You don't care until they start like actually attacking you. And
right.
So yeah, that's to sum up what I was getting at, is that having clear boundaries of like, this role does not do this thing, I think is a good way to start too. Like in my game, I think I'm going to say the humans never get to re-roll dice. It's only the computers are re-rolling the humans' dice. And then that keeps the rolls feel extra special too. So.
Interesting. I need to play that game still. I haven't played the glasses game.
Sometime. Yep. I'm pitching it soon. But
great. Awesome.
I've been working on it for many years, like pre-COVID.
Oh, wow.
Many different iterations, and someday hopefully it'll come out. But yeah.
Awesome.
And we got Ananda's Asymmetric Games Sprocket Forge coming out sometime in 2025. Right?
Yeah, next year.
Yeah.
Technically, only the advanced mode is asymmetric. The basic mode is fully symmetric for people that don't want special powers.
Yeah.
But what did you learn in making those rolls? Like,
I mean, I learned that in this world is an amazing tool for game design.
But I mean, like, trying to balance them, I guess.
Actually, the publisher's done most of the balancing.
Oh, that's nice.
I came up with the initial ideas, and they've done some tweaks to balance out the numbers.
Because that's one other thing to think about as a designer, is like, if you make your game symmetric, it's going to be way easier to test.
That's true.
Yes.
Yes.
And
you test one roll, you test them all.
Yeah. Sometimes it's like when I do development for Floodgate games, and sometimes when we're like, oh yeah, we could just add in a special player power that you start with, and then when we think about it, we're like, oh, that's going to add like at least like twice as many play tests to make sure it works. But the advantage is players love having some special thing to start with. So
making them feel unique, and if there are things that they want to purchase or build upon, they want that foundation to really understand like what they want to go for. If I've learned anything with my Archmagus game recently, people like to have direction before the game starts, so that they don't have to just make all the choices all the time.
Yeah,
especially if you have a lot of options available.
Yeah. Another advantage of asymmetry. It's like, oh, this is what I'm good at.
Oh, I'm good at this. I want to pursue that. Yeah.
Cool. Any last thoughts on asymmetric games?
They're not asynchronous games, though often can be played asynchronously.
Yep.
Actually, I think they work quite well asynchronously often, just because of the complexity of the game.
Oh,
Like-
yeah. More
like-
thought space.
Yeah, well, it's it's something where having a lot of time to think and to look up rules and stuff is very beneficial. The Great Zimbabwe can be played asynchronously online, and I think it works very well that way.
Yeah, being able to look at everyone's position and, you don't feel the time
Yeah.
pressure,
And similarly, I think Root, I believe the digital implementation supports asynchronous play, I think. So yeah, I think a lot of the time the games are complicated enough and have strong turn structures that make them great for asynchronous play.
I'm actually amazed we got through this whole series, but not one mention of Spirit Island.
Oh, how did we do
One
that?
of one of Ananda's favorite co-ops that's asymmetric, but
I mean,
we've talked a lot about it, but
yeah. I mean,
Another 30 minutes later.
talk more about it, but, yeah.
See our episode on Spirit Island for
Yeah.
more information.
Actually, in that episode on Spirit Island, we did talk a little bit about, what makes for good asymmetric powers, specifically in a co-op game.
yes.
That being able to share parts of your power with other players is really good. Actually, we did the same thing when we talked about Cosmic Encounter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that's a key part.
Man, we're just building up this whole repertoire.
So many throwbacks now, but that's good.
But yeah, like with asymmetric games, being able to get a fragment of another player's power is super cool.
Yeah, it's very fun.
Both in the way Spirit Island and in the way Cosmic Encounter do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Lots to chew on here for our
Now I'm going to go back
listeners.
and listen to Spirit Island. Jeez.
Yeah. Yeah. But hopefully you participate in this design challenge that Trevor's going to put forward on the Discord.
And I do believe I'm going to retcon it a little bit, and there will be one for the previous month as well, for the month of October. So you'll be able to kind of look back and see what the first one was, and then you can kind of see what this one will be.
Give people some FOMO for missing out if they're just listening and not
FOMO.
on the Discord. Yeah, great.
How do people join the Discord? We'll figure it out.
Good. Wait.
Is it on the website?
We'll
I
put
should
it
be
on
the
the
website.
Yeah.
We should have a link on the website.
Yeah, but special shout out to Trevor. He's been doing like a lot of community events, especially in the Twin Cities with his Split Perspective Studios and
Thanks, Trevor.
multiple game jams that, like one of those game jams has produced a game that's going to be made for me, and also maybe some more in the future. Who knows? Yeah.
I love seeing all the ideas and thoughts and things that are coming through design days and all that. Yeah, it's a fun time.
Yeah. So if you're a new designer and you haven't tried a challenge like a game jam, or there's Cardboard Edison contests, Game Crafter does contests all the time.
Constantly contests everywhere.
Yep. Button Shy Games design 18 card wall game. They have contests once in a while. So yeah, they're great.
Loads of options.
Yep. All right. With that, tune in next time for our next series, which we'll decide and talk about.
Hey, thanks for listening to The Tabletop Takeaway. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. So please tell your friends and visit our website at thetabletoptakeaway.com, where you can suggest games and mechanics for us to cover next on the show.